Morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to introduce the two speakers of this session. I would like to introduce Associate Professor Henk Huijser first. Associate Professor Henk Huijser is an expert in curriculum design, academic development, and technology-enhanced learning. Currently serving as the strategic lead for educator development and recognition at Queensland University of Technology. He has been shaping the future of learning and teaching since 2023. With a career that spans diverse educational contexts in Australia, the Middle East, and China, his global perspective and innovative approach have earned him reputation. He holds a PhD in Screen and Media Studies from the University of Waikato, and his research and practice focus on key areas such as problem-based learning, blended learning, indigenous education, and micro-credentials. His expertise has been recognized through numerous awards, including the Queensland University of Technology's Vice Chancellor's Award for Excellence and several prestigious editorial roles, including co-editor of the Australian Journal of Educational Technology and Journal of Peer Learning. His contributions extend beyond academia with impactful research projects on learning analytics, student retention, and education pathways. His leadership in these areas has shaped how we think about the future of education and its role in fostering equity and innovation. We are privileged to have him share his insights with us at this conference. Please join me in warmly welcoming Associate Professor Henk Huijser. And now let me introduce Associate Professor Fathima Ahmad Wali, a distinguished academic from Bahrain Polytechnic, Kingdom of Bahrain. She is an accomplished educator and researcher with over 2 decades of experience in teaching English as a second language, curriculum development, and e-learning course design. She holds a PhD in Applied Linguistics and Intercultural Studies from Dublin City University and advanced degrees in Applied English Language Studies and Education from the University of Bahrain. Her diverse research interest encompasses online language learning, computer-assisted language learning, interdisciplinary education, entrepreneurship education, and problem-based learning, which highly reflect her interest in integrating modern methodologies into language education. Beyond her scholarly achievements, Dr. Wali has demonstrated exemplary leadership in initiatives such as revamping English courses to align with Bahrain Economic Vision 2030 and enhancing educational quality through her work with international quality assurance frameworks. Her certificates, including Quality Matters and Adult Teaching Credentials, highlight her ability to merge academic rigor with practical expertise. Now I would like to invite Associate Professor Henk Huijser and Associate Professor Fathima Wali to conduct the session. Over to you, Professor Henk Huijser and Professor Fathima Wali. Thank you.
Okay, I'm hoping you can see this all. Let me know if you can't. And I'm hoping that you can hear me also. That's good. So this is the title of... Oh, sorry. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor. And it's also very nice for me to work together with Associate Professor Fathima Wali. Years ago, we used to work together at Bahrain Polytechnic. So it's really nice to do this work together. So the title of our presentation today is Exploring English Language Teaching after Gen AI. And Fathima will talk about her about a case study that she's doing in Bahrain. I will first of all do an outline of the potential impacts of generative AI. Then I'll talk a little bit about assessment and Gen AI, some of the challenges and opportunities involved. Danny Liu and Bridgman's two-lane approach. Danny Liu is at the University of Sydney and is very influential in Australia in his approaches to Gen AI. So I'll talk a little bit about that and what he means by a two-lane approach. Then Professor Alex Steele has responded to that with something he's called a six-lane approach, which is a bit more of an expansion of the two-lane approach. One of the main responses to Gen AI has been to think about, particularly in terms of assessment, has been to think about programmatic assessment. And so I'll talk a little bit about what that means and what the implications are. It's not easy to achieve, but there are some institutions here in Australia that are trying to implement programmatic assessment. And so it's worth considering and thinking about. Okay. So then I'll talk a little bit about disruptions to language teaching and learning as a result of Gen AI. And before I hand it over to Fathima to talk about Bahrain Polytechnic and what she's doing there. Okay, so first of all, about the impacts and implications. Generative AI has been around for a while, but ChatGPT in 2022, November, caused a bit of a ripple, or a tsunami, rather. So it's, and it's still causing a lot of rethinking of what we're doing. The tricky part about that is that it's a dynamic situation. So it's not like we come to terms with this and then we go about our usual business. Generative AI is very dynamic in terms of how it's improving, and what the implications are for what we do. So we constantly have to rethink what we do in response. But of course, there are opportunities as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But one of the things we have to carefully consider is, and this is quite fundamental in my view, is what the value of writing itself is. So the process of writing. Because what Gen AI does, or provides an opportunity, is to kind of almost bypass the process of writing. Now, for those of us who have been writing for a long time, that's okay, because we know we have the skills. We have the basic fundamental skills of writing in English, reading in English. And the process of writing itself involves critical thinking. So it involves, like, the process itself makes us learn and makes us think and makes us able to rethink things. Now, if you automate that process, and that's what Gen AI effectively does, what do we actually lose? So we have to carefully think about this. So how does it learn? How does it change the actual learning process? Now, to give you a clear example of this, a couple of weeks ago, I went to a presentation about Notebook LM, and which allows you to produce podcasts. Now, what you do is you take a journal article, for example, you put it through Notebook LM, it takes a minute, and then it will produce a podcast. This is very useful, potentially, for example, for students who are time poor, they don't have time to do the readings before class. So you give them the option to use this and produce a podcast. In terms of what I was saying before, that then means that they no longer have to read. So the podcasts discusses what the reading is about, and it gives them an overview. Again, we have to kind of think very carefully. Like this sounds like a great tool, right? But we do have to think about what is it that we actually lose in this process. Now, the other impacts that we have to carefully consider, and this also relates to impacts and implications, is ethical use. And so I went to a presentation by Professor Rowena Harper a couple of weeks ago, and she's at Edith Cowan University in Perth. This is in the west of Australia. She talked a lot about the ethics of the ethical use of Gen AI. And so Gen AI is a product of exploitation. It's basically using other people's work and it doesn't produce anything in itself. So Naomi Klein, a Canadian academic, has called this the largest and most consequential theft in human history, right? Which is a bit dramatic, but it is something to think about. Because, you know, when you talk about intellectual property, when you talk about, you know, creative production, Gen AI just takes all that and repurposes it without asking, right? So that there's ethical implications in that. Now, the training data that it uses is not neutral either. It comes from a whole lot of different parts, but it often means non-representative, it's incomplete, it's popular, and it's hegemonic, i.e. Western. Now, in the podcast example I gave you, what we did was put in an article into Notebook LM, and the podcast consisted of a white male who was the holder of knowledge, interviewed by a female who was very interested in everything he had to say. And so there's this kind of bias in the way Gen AI produces what it produces, and that has ethical implications as well. So the operations of Gen AI are not transparent. We cannot verify the means by which it generates its output, its methodology. It's all hidden, right? So we put something in, it produces something that seems useful. We don't know how that's actually worked unless we're computer scientists or people who know everything about this, but very few of us are. So it also, of course, routinely generates hallucinations, as they're called in this context, for the content that AI tools are programmed to make up. So that includes making up references that don't exist. And so we have been dealing with this for a while now. Of course, this is all improving as we go along, and that's what I meant by the dynamic part of this. Okay. So it excels in generating outputs that appear to be intelligent, informed, factual, analytical, critical, but it may have no basis in reality. So we have to be, in this sense, its intent could be seen as manipulative because it's trying to make things sound good without it necessarily having any basis, right? And so the final bit, and this is a huge bit, is about the environmental impact, right? So a request made through ChatGPT consumes about 10 times the electricity of a Google search. And so in that way, if you think about the sheer like in terms of how widely this is now taken up and the sheer electricity it consumes and it needs to consume to produce what it produces, it has the potential to impact and accelerate climate change. And we all know how serious that is. So yeah, these are kind of things to consider. Okay, so I'll now focus a little bit on assessment and the kind of questions we need to ask in the context of Gen AI, because assessment has changed considerably. So to change our own assessment, because students can just come up with the answers by using ChatGPT, for example, we should ask ourselves, why are we assessing our students? What are we assessing them for? What is being assessed? And how is the evidence of learning being gathered? So, and it's not like these sound like simple questions, but they're not necessarily simple. This is what I meant earlier by when I said we need to have a shift in the way we think about assessment, right? We need to go back to the fundamentals of what it is we're trying to get our students to learn and what it is we are therefore assessing. Okay, so sometime last year, a colleague of mine who lives just across the river that you see in the background of my window, Jason Lodge, came up with a taxonomy of assessment in generative AI and options that we have in response. And so what you can see here is in the short-term responses, medium-term responses, and long-term responses. And the only green parts there are really about our options. So our options are to ultimately embrace this and work with it rather than against it. Because ignoring it or banning it is just not an option. It's just we can't keep up with the technology and the speed with which it's changing things. So ultimately, the best option is to rethink what we're doing, which is what I was referring to. So TEXA, which is the Tertiary Education Quality and Standard Agency in Australia, has come up with some guiding principles in response. So that list there includes appropriate and authentic engagement with AI, that's the advice, a systematic approach to program assessment, which is aligned with disciplines and qualifications. And this is what I was talking about earlier, and I'll come back to that a bit later. So this is programmatic assessment. It should emphasize the process of learning rather than just the output, and that's an important thing, right? So often we assess the product, the end product of what students have to produce. We don't assess the process they go through, the learning process they go through to get to that end product. Now, the end product is much easier to produce with the use of generative AI. So, and that means that if we focus on the process of learning, we have more opportunities to assess at an appropriate level. So, yeah, and then creating opportunities for students to work appropriately with each other and AI, and then assess that process. Okay, so this is and TEXA is the main regulatory body in Australia as well. So this is it regulates what universities do. So the advice from TEXA is very important in the Australian context. Okay, so this is the two-lane approach I mentioned earlier. So lane one would be assured assessment of learning, right? So these are like things that you can't use generative AI for. So examples of that include in-class assessment. So for example, during tutorials or workshops. So you're in front of, so students doing things in front of you that you're assessing while they're doing it or after they've just done it, right? So you can see what they're doing. Viva voces and other interactive oral assessments. Those are, so for example, if you have a written assessment, what you do then is you do an interactive oral assessment afterwards, where you ask students to explain the process they used to produce what they have produced. And so you can question them on it. Now, if they can't answer the questions, it quickly becomes clear that they've used, for example, a Gen AI tool to produce the piece of writing, for example, right? Live simulation-based assessments is another one, or supervised on-campus exams and tests. That's always an option. Ideally, we minimize this as much as possible because it's not particularly authentic. But, you know, it is one of the options we have as part of lane one, as part of assured assessment of learning. Lane two are examples of where we use human AI collaboration in the assessment of learning. So we allow students to use AI to suggest ideas, to summarize resources, to generate outline structures for assessments. And so they then provide AI completions as an appendix, and you get them to reflect on how they've used it. Yeah, and I will share these slides later on, but these are some other examples. And the link down the bottom there will take you to the article that mentions these as well. Now, Professor Alex Steele, who is at the University of New South Wales, he's kind of taken that idea of two-lane approach and turned it into 6 lanes to make it a little bit more specific. So lane one would be no assistance at all, no generative AI assistance allowed. And then lane two would be simple editing assistance, so you're allowed, but in some ways only. And then lane three would be planning and designing assistance. So you allow students to use generative AI tools to generate initial ideas, structures, outlines, but then they have to take those ideas and do something with it themselves, right? Assistance with attribution. So, for example, an assessment that requires students to write and create a first iteration themselves, and then they are permitted to use it to improve on it. The 5th lane would be generative AI software-based assessments. And those are assessments that are designed for you to use generative AI as part of the assessed learning outcomes. And the final one is non-applicable. So that's lane 6. Generative AI is considered not to be of any assistance in completing this assessment. And so that relates to some of the lane 2 parts of the Liu and Bridgman piece. Okay. There are many frameworks around now. This is one of the most recent ones that do kind of similar things, you know. So this is the AI assessment scale by Furs and colleagues. This was published last week, so it's very recent. And it's interesting. It's very similar to the different lanes that I've just discussed. Okay. As promised, I was going to talk to you a little bit about programmatic assessment. And the interesting part about programmatic assessment is that it essentially it's very focused on program-based learning outcomes. So it looks at the whole program and how all the assessments in a program are related to each other. And so if you do this very well, then you can link each assessment in every unit of a program or in every course of a program. And so they build on each other, right? Now, Fatima and myself, we used to work together at Bahrain Polytechnic, where they do a lot of problem-based learning. And problem-based learning throughout the program follows a programmatic assessment structure, right? So problems that students have to assess, that students have to address in groups, can run between different courses over a whole program. And so you can see the development of skills over time, and you can assess things that relate to each other. So what that does is it allows you to assess the process that students go through rather than the product at an individual course level. And so it's overall, it's seen as a system of assessment that promotes the trustworthiness of an overall award, rather than relying on a series of singular, uncoordinated judgments. And so Professor Rowena Harper, who I mentioned earlier, she works at Edith Cowan University, and they've just decided to do away with individual course learning outcomes and only have program level learning outcomes for the whole program or the whole degree. So that's, I won't get into the details of that, but it's a very interesting approach, and it's worth kind of thinking about and discussing in your own kind of context in terms of whether that would be appropriate and what the benefits would be. Yes. Okay, I'm just looking at the clock. I've got a couple of more minutes left before I'll hand it over to Fathima. So in relation to language teaching and learning, this comes from a very recent article by Bill Cope and Mary Calensis and Zapata. This has just been published as well. They identify different levels of language teaching and then relate that to how good GenAI is at those parts of language teaching. So it's good at common nouns and connected adjectives and adverbs, but not so good at instances, proper nouns, on account of their relative sparseness. And this then creates what we call hallucinations or big mistakes or things that don't make sense, right? Gen AI might at some stage drive autonomous agents and get them to write autonomous pieces, but we are not there yet. Gen AI is very good at textual structure. It's a genre machine. So it's if you give it the right prompts, it will produce a textual structure that is appropriate to a particular genre or discipline. And a good example of that is if you have an academic text that is full of jargon, you can ask it to turn it into lay people's terms, and it's very good at producing something that uses simpler language, right? So that's context. GenAI is not able to fully account for the context beyond its large language models. So this is where the human factor comes in, right? And of course, it will increasingly get better at this, but it's nowhere near there yet. Okay. And the final one, it's good, like I said, it's good at textual genres and registers that reflect different kinds of interests. So I urge you to go and have a read through this paper. This is just a very little part that I took out, but it's a very interesting paper, particularly for those in terms of language teaching and learning. And this is a figure that essentially says the same thing, but in visual format. So I will leave it there. And I'm thinking that Fathima is in the room. And so I will let her take over. And there she is.
Okay. I have
Lovely to
completed my
see.
part.
Before you do, Fatima, can we just pause for a moment and see if there are any questions at this point
Sure, definitely.
for
Yeah.
me?
Yeah.
Because I realized I did run through a lot of content there. So if you have any questions at this stage, I'm happy to try and answer them. I'm just looking in the chat, and there doesn't appear to be any questions in the chat. Okay. All right, I'll pass it up. Thank you for listening, and I'll pass it on to Fatima.
Thank you, Henk. I have started my part right at the start, waiting for you. So we're done. Both of us are done right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. That's good. I thought that's what you said, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so Fatima, did you get any questions? Did you?
Yes, there was one question only, and I got to respond to that. It's with regard to having um, written scripts of students, but they are not done online. Unfortunately, the tool is not really allowing any kind of scanned copies to be uploaded. So they've got to be in a scenario in a lab in which they get to upload their writings to a virtual learning environment like Moodle, as we do at the Polytechnic. That was the only question that yeah.
Okay, interesting. Are there any other questions?
Hello. I forward this to both of you. So in country like Sri Lanka, so we are in there's a issue in assessing the speaking and listening in large scale exams. There are like some national examinations like that. While you were explaining that the two-lane approach, you mentioned that something regarding the Viva and some kind of oral examinations. There are some assessments there. So I would like to know that in what extent that we can apply that. They are in some national level examination where the millions of students take part at the same time.
That's a very good question. And
What are the obstacles as well there?
Yeah. No, so the answer is it's a big challenge to do that at scale, right? So you would need basically, because I get in my own context, I get asked this quite a lot, like how am I going to do this if I have 500 students in my course? Um, you know, what you need, and this is really dependent on resources, is a whole team around you of tutors who can do oral assessments, because you can't obviously do this at scale by yourself. You need, like if realistically and logistically, if you're going to do oral examinations, they last about 10 minutes each. So, if you count how many hours there are in the day, like you can't do that many, right? So you have to have a whole lot of different people going through this process if you are to do that. And I do realize that is a massive challenge. So it's one option, but it works much better with smaller groups of students.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I assume Henk is expected to start first, and then it was supposed to be my turn, but I'm going to start by part of the presentation until Henk arrives. I'll share my presentation. Okay. I would like to start by introducing the case study that we are implementing at Bahrain Polytechnic, implementing AI rubrics in marking our papers and marking our written assessments, as we all face as English teachers the increasing number of papers that we mark every single semester is a lot, and the demand of that is increasing as well. So we face a challenge of managing all these large volumes of student submissions, and we are expected to provide consistent and personalized and timely feedback. But as English teachers, we can actually sometimes be subjective, but grading writing is subjective and requires us to balance thoroughness and efficiency at the same time, especially when we are teaching EFL students who can be of different writing levels in one class. We all need to personalize feedback because generic feedback fails to guide students effectively in their development in the written skill. And the pressure to offer feedback quickly, especially with all these deadlines when we are running assessments and we are expected to give the grades back to students as well as the feedback, can hinder opportunities for students to revise their work and improve over time. So with all these complexities, we as English teachers struggle to address each student's individual needs within the limited time available, making the grading process time-consuming and demanding for all of us. So we thought of why not explore the potential of AI rubrics. Now, AI rubrics have a number of benefits, and there are many. Here we go. Sorry. There are many AI rubrics available right now, but we thought we're going to explore each one at a time. Right now, we are exploring Co-Grader. We are a number of 3 English teachers in both degree and foundation English at Bahrain Polytechnic, as well as 2 math teachers exploring the benefits of Co-Grader as an AI tool for grading students' writing, because it has become increasingly sophisticated, offering us automated assessment, feedback on grammar, content, structure, and argument quality. AI rubrics such as Co-Grader also help streamline and enhance the grading process, and it allows us to assess student work better and save time on grading as well. The other benefit that it offers is that you can actually increase the efficiency by automating the initial evaluation, and it allows us to focus on higher level feedback rather than the routine tasks like grammar checking and punctuation checking all the time. The tool also ensures consistency and objectivity, and it eliminates our human bias. It provides fair evaluations for all students. It also has the capability to run the same rubric for large classes, any number that you can think of, in thousands, right at the same time, at a very quick speed. And it has a consistent, as I said earlier, feedback across all these hundreds of assignments uploaded. It provides also data-driven insights. It helps us track not only the progress at this time, but we can actually save the same data and track the progress over time, over different semesters. And of course, it aligns with the learning objectives that we upload. So it is really useful in terms of aligning everything from the learning outcomes to the end of giving these students their assessments. But with all these tools available, why did we start with CoGrader? Actually, CoGrader is designed to help us to give feedback. And it is very easy to use. It's basically about us uploading all the assignments, setting our rubric exactly as is in the classroom, and then with one click, in a few seconds, you will see all the grades and the feedback coming up on the screen for each and every student individually. It automates grading process while offering personalized and detailed feedback. And it becomes really, really beneficial with large number of students or high volumes of assignments for a small number of students. Now, CoGrader offers a range of benefits to all of us. And one of these is ensuring that we have objective grading. We are not biased because these are our students, and it eliminates bias. It provides tailored feedback for each and every student, not only based on grammar, content, and structure, but it can actually operate as in you can make the feedback shorter, you can make it more friendly, you can make it more strict. You have all these options based on each student and your knowledge, your personal knowledge of this student and what he or she needs in the feedback. It is accessible as a tool to all of us, and it has many other features. However, it also has some limitations that I'm going to discuss further later on. So what did we do? We actually implemented CoGrader 1.1. There are two versions of CoGrader. The free one is 1.1. And we thought of why not test the effectiveness of it as a tool to assess our students at Bahrain Polytechnic. Now, the sample that we have is divided into two parts. We have 8 classes, 4 of which are from the foundation English level. And it's a course at CFR B1 in terms of the level of students. We took this sample basically because we teach these students, so it was not selecting from other people's classes. It's our own classes, the people who are writing this chapter together. So I am teaching in foundation right now, and my number of students is around 63 students that participated in this activity. And looking at the Polytechnic and how it is growing, we basically receive 8,000 students per semester. And we are only 30 English teachers across the two divisions, foundation and degree. So you can imagine the number of written assignments and assessments is not only the assignments that students are demanding feedback for, and they would like to see their grades or anticipated grades for the actual summative assessments. So it becomes really, really challenging to give feedback to all of them and finish on time when it comes around the marking time of assessments. So in both courses, what we did was we spent the first 8 weeks of the semester. We designed the whole course to have a run of writing and specifically writing skills assessments and assignments in the first 8 weeks. And we worked on students writing in foundation to make them learn how to synthesize, how to take notes, and then write a summary. For EFL students, especially from an Arabic-speaking background, this has been challenging at their level. And we can see that B1 is supposed to be an acceptable level, but with their mother tongue interference, it becomes more challenging. And not all students are at the same level in their writing, so it's even more challenging to reach to all these needs. In terms of the degree students, they are supposed to be at low B2, but not all of them are at low B2. The majority is, and again, we have the same 8 weeks for the writing skill to be enhanced, and then they are expected to write a technical report instead of the summary, because they are expected to have reports written in their disciplines, degree disciplines. So we train them to write that with the foundation of all these skills for report writing. We've tested our course and the rubrics for the writing on Co-Grader 1.1. And we found that the free version is limited and it has limited flexibility. The first problem that we faced is with regard to the design of the rubric itself. It doesn't really allow us to have the exact weighting that is available in our Moodle rubrics. So the totals and the weightings, as well as the criteria, is difficult to match because of the restrictions in Co-Grader. The tool has a fixed grading system. This is the problem. Meaning that as teachers, we must build our own rubrics around the preset total score and the predefined criteria that Co-Grader gives. This can be restrictive for those of us who want to customize grading and grading weight to adjust the criteria or to suit our specific assignments or learning objectives. As a result of all of that, we may find ourselves working with the constraints of the tool structure rather than tailoring it to our needs and to our assessments. So what do we suggest? Now, with all these limitations and limited flexibility, grading complex creative assignments, and predefined rubrics, the tool also lacks contextual understanding, which can make it less effective in providing feedback tailored to specific students' needs. And it tends to overemphasize on mechanical aspects like grammar, like structure, and the limited feedback it offers is restricted to some linguistic components, but it doesn't really give any kind of non-linguistic element feedback with regard to, for example, analyzing tables or analyzing graphs for the report. We face that in degree English in particular. Co-Grader can assist students, and specifically EFL students, only with syntax. grammar, basic writing structure, but it is not specifically designed for EFL needs. So what are we expected to do in order to use CoGrader and make benefit of it? We need to address the limitations. And in the past 10 days, we've been granted the most advanced version of CoGrader, which is 2.26. And we can say that, yes, the designers of the tool are addressing these limitations. And we noticed that we can actually now work with the restrictions of the rubric, but for a very short time. They've given us 14 days to test it. And yes, they managed to fix all of that in terms of the rubric criteria, the rubric weighting, the rubric divisions in terms of good or no submission to excellent. These have all been fixed, but not in the free version. So what are we expecting from CoGrader to encourage the rest of us to use it actually? I think that CoGrader should incorporate AI that adapts to creative and complex assignments, such as working with the tables and graph analysis, in order to have a balanced feedback for all of them. Another thing that it should do is integrate non-linguistic elements and tailor some of these rubrics to address the needs of EFL needs, not just the mechanical accuracy part. If we continued using AI for our teacher feedback, using CoGrader and trying to focus and collaborate with each other, I think we can actually suggest these modifications to the designers to have a more flexible, inclusive, and probably effective grading tool. But right now, the free version up to this moment that we are testing requires more work. That is it for my part. I assume Dr. Henk is around right now.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Henk Huijser and Associate Professor Fathima Ahmad Wali, for your insightful and very enlightening session. And also thank you all the participants for asking questions, and it shows your enthusiasm as well.